Today on the Bourbon Bytes podcast, Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 goes bigger than ever. Whiskey lovers' favorite glass celebrates an incredible anniversary. 2 Scotch distilleries celebrate big age-stated releases. And an independent bottler in America is trying to win over Scotch drinkers. Plus, I'm reviewing the newest release of Russell's Reserve 13 in my Byte-Sized review. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bourbon Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Clifton, and this is the week of November 6th, 2025. I hope you all had a wonderful Halloween season and got up to no good. We kind of did something different this year. We didn't do anything Halloween, but we did make a trip to Temecula, which is a smaller wine region here in Southern California. And they had what they called a harvest fest, where they had a bunch of different wineries along the local wine trail, doing a thing where they offered some tastings, some bites of food along the way. And there were 11 total, and we were able to hit 8 of the wineries in one day. So I was pretty impressed with that. I thought it was a great way to spend the Halloween weekend without dressing up. But today we have some bourbon news, as well as a very fun review that I've been looking forward to doing here on the podcast for a while now. The news comes to us from not just American whiskey, but all over the world of whiskey. So let's get into it. We have quite a few news stories to get into, and I'm excited for it. So let's dig in. The first of which is a big news story coming to us from Jack Daniel's. They're actually rolling out their largest size bottle since Prohibition. So they're rolling out a 3-liter bottle of Jack Daniel's. Now, this is just the traditional Old No. 7 recipe, but it's the first time that they're ever releasing it in the U.S. since Prohibition. You've been able to get it in Canada and some other international markets. But since the TTB regulations changed recently, that allows for different bottle sizes, like we're starting to see a lot more 700 milliliter versus the 750. One of these new additions to what's allowed is the 3-liter bottle. They say that Old No. 7 Tennessee whiskey has been at the heart of everything we make at Jack Daniel's Distillery since the day of Mr. Jack himself. We hope this bold new take will help create timeless holiday memories that last long after the bottle is gone. Now, of course, bold new take is just referring to the size of the bottle. It's the exact same recipe. This was coming out at about $80 MSRP, which I guess is fair. I don't know. I mean, if you think of like a double a handle of Jack, so a handle of Jack being $40, it's a little bit up there in price, I think. I've never bought a handle of Jack, but I do know that the regular 750 bottles are around $17-18. So honestly, it's a little bit pricey, but for the novelty itself, that's pretty fun. If you are a huge Jack Daniel's lover, or you have someone in your family that is, I think this would be a fun holiday gift to give them, just because it looks so so massive. But yeah, that is hitting the markets very, very soon, if it's not already there. It's starting this month. One other quick shout out this week is to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Glencairn Glass. Apparently it was introduced and designed in the year 2000. This has since become the official glass of whiskey. I use it for almost all of my reviews if I'm not using my Kentucky Bourbon Trail glass. Usually when I'm sipping at home and, not necessarily thinking about a whiskey and trying to review it, I use the Kentucky Bourbon Trail glass just because it's easier to put some ice cubes in if I want to, have a higher proof whiskey over ice. But almost always when I'm doing a review, and especially when I'm doing a blind review, I always use a Glencairn glass. So I had no idea. It's 25 years old. Honestly, I probably would have assumed it's older than that. But yeah, they recently had a celebration where they brought together a lot of whiskey makers from various distilleries to celebrate in Edinburgh with Raymond Davidson, who is the official creator of the glass. So yeah, congratulations. Although, if you choose to drink out of a rocks glass, I'm not going to judge you. I will say that the Glencairn glass is one of the best ways to nose a whiskey in my experience, especially if you want to let it just open up a bit. I feel like the glass just really maintains the overall character of a whiskey in a nice way, in ways that other glasses don't. So it's one of my top glasses of choice. So yeah, 25 years. Wow. Now we do have a couple of new whiskeys to talk about this week. One of which is from Arran Distillers out of Scotland. They've recently just launched their Arran Barley Single Malt series. This is their batch 1 of this. It is a 10-year-old project where they're using barley grown exclusively on the island of Arran. Now, we've seen a few different Scotch whiskey makers do this. I'm thinking in particular, Bruichladdich has one. Springbank has a local barley as well. But it is so interesting to see these whiskey makers using entirely local barley. I think that kind of makes it define a characteristic that sets it apart from other whiskeys on the market. I mean, we see some of the same thing with American Single Malt and even bourbon, sourcing from local farms, using local varietals of corn or rye or whatever. And I think it's the next evolution of craft whiskey making, not necessarily saying craft distilleries, but being able to, refine your mash into something that's local, that's personal, that's, not just generic corn number 1 from wherever you're sourcing it from. I think that's a really cool aspect. And this one being a 10-year-old first release is really, really exciting. It's coming in at 50% ABV, so 100 proof. And since 2015, they've been sourcing their barley from 2 fields located beside its sister distillery, Lag Distillery, on the south end of the island of Arran. Now, what's even more interesting is they say the crop is grown with integrated livestock operations to help lower the overall carbon footprint. So, again, that's another benefit of it. You're keeping it local. You're benefiting the local farmers and the fields that you're dealing with. Love to see it. Now, this release was matured in a combination of first fill bourbon barrels and second fill sherry hogshead barrels. It is non-chill filtered and has no added color. Same with the core lineup from Arran. And this first release is going to be about 18,000 bottles available worldwide. Now, to stick with the theme of sustainability, they're actually releasing this in a recyclable cardboard tube that's replacing the traditional metal base that they usually do with their releases, just to kind of celebrate the impact of this whiskey itself. They're planning to release a new batch of this every year, with this being the first one, and the edition is going to vary based on the crop, the cask selection, and available volumes. So keep an eye out for that looking forward. But I'm really excited to see this new expression. I would love a chance to try it. Now, I'm not seeing anything in the press release here about price. Let me do a little bit more digging. Let's see if I can find something. Okay, I found it on their website. It's currently going for £52. Which translates to roughly $67, $68 here in the US. So I think it's a very fair price. Now, that's, of course, bought locally, not considering things like imports and tariffs and all that fun stuff. I don't typically buy from overseas and have shipped locally. I know a lot of people in the whiskey community do. So if you could let me know roughly how much that would be, I would love a chance to try it. But I might just wait till it hits the States, because it does say it'll be available worldwide. I just don't think it's here yet. Like I said, this was just announced. But very, very cool. Very excited to give that a try. Now, another new release from overseas, Cutty Sark. Yes, that brand, the brand that is known for some of their lower end whiskeys, just their blended malt whiskeys. They're actually releasing a 17-year-old blend. This one's going to come out with a MSRP of around 85 to 90 pounds, around $120-ish US. And they say this blend consists of malts from sherry and port casks married with bourbon cask aged grain whiskey, and is the second oldest blend in Cutty Sark's range. Now, this grain whiskey is different from the single malts, we've seen with older age statements like this before, but I'm really interested to see how that sherry and port cask impacts such a old whiskey. They say to create this rich blend, they selected fine aged Highland and Speyside single malts and married them together for 17 months in hand-picked sherry and port casks. They then united those malts with lowland grain whiskey matured in first fill bourbon cask for exceptional creaminess. I think the price seems very fair for something like this. I think grain whiskey in general is quite a bit cheaper than single malts, of course, which, kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting to see a brand like Cutty Sark do something like this. They say this is their second oldest, so I'm curious what their oldest is. Let me see. Oh, wow, they had a 33-year-old release that came out back in 2014. Okay, that's quite a bit older. Oh, that's a beautiful bottle. It's very like Gatsby themed. That's really pretty. So yeah, not quite 33 years old, but still a really nice age statement on that Scotch. All right, last bit of international news. The East London Liquor Company is actually moving to a new location. And the only reason I mention this is because I've actually bought a bottle from them when I went to Europe earlier this year. I bought their London Rye Whiskey, which was a Chardonnay cask rye whiskey. One of the craziest things, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but it's funny to see a rye whiskey from London. So they'd previously been in the Bow Wharf Distillery, but they are now moving to London Fields on Mentmore Terrace. I, wish I could tell you what I know where those were, but you know what? I'm just reading the press release here. But they say this new location is an altar to New World whiskey. They're also moving their commercial offices there as well as a custom lab to spearhead new product development. They're also adding a whiskey blending room for both consumers and industry professionals. Now, what's interesting about this is they're kind of transitioning away from being a distillery, and they're actually going to start sourcing their products for their portfolio, partnering with other distilleries in the area versus, necessarily being a distillery themselves. They say in the current economic climate where overheads and labor costs are only going one way, the sustainable model for us as an indie producer is to retain our production team and all their expertise in-house and be nomadic in our distilling locations. They say they have a phenomenal network of partner distilleries, and their team are incredibly excited to be working with them. And to celebrate this new move, they're also announcing their first new product in 3 years. It's called East London Threads, and it's a blended whiskey developed in partnership with Compass Box founder John Glaser. You guys know I'm a huge fan of Compass Box here on the channel, so that is a very, very exciting collaboration. I'm hoping to see more things like that from them. Like I said, the London Rye Whiskey was definitely unique. It was unlike anything I've had before. Again, not my cup of tea, but I do love experimentation, and I love seeing distilleries from regions we don't typically think of as whiskey locations. So I'll keep an eye on the East London Liquor Company and see what's next for them. All right, one last piece of news before we go into our bite-sized review. This is American whiskey news, but it kind of relates to all the Scotch news I've been saying. Independent bottler Lost Lantern is revealing its fall 2025 collection. And these are 7 different American single malts that are designed to appeal to Scotch whiskey drinkers. So American single malt's always been kind of a weird category, right? I feel like it blends some of the things we love about bourbon and American whiskey with some of the traditions of, Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, things we see internationally more so than here domestically in the U.S. Well, this collection is meant to appeal to those international markets and Scotch drinkers, maybe as a way to pull them into the world of American single malt. This is actually going to be released next week on November 12th, and it's going to feature bottlings from distilleries including McCarthy's, Warfield, and 888. I'm not very familiar with any of those, but if you are an American single malt fan, maybe you have heard of those. Let me know what you think of those. They say that these all have a more traditional flavor profile that is meant to appeal to fans of Scotch. Lost Lantern co-founder Adam Polonsky, I think I'm saying that right, says that while the single malts and blended malts in this collection are not and could never be Scotch, which of course can only be made in Scotland, these unique and exceptional whiskeys will hold special appeal to Scotch lovers. They say they worked closely with each of these distilleries in the collection to source truly first-of-their-kind whiskeys for the collection as a way to invite Scotch lovers into American single malt. Now, Lost Lantern started back in 2020, like I said, as an independent bottler. They've collaborated with more than 40 U.S. distilleries. So this is the first time they are launching a collection that is composed entirely of single and blended malts. They say American single malt has rapidly become one of the most dynamic styles of whiskey in the world, and they are excited for Scotch lovers to join us in exploring the more traditional side of this fast-rising style. I think this is super interesting because a couple weeks ago, if you remember, I reviewed, it was technically a malt whiskey from Heaven Hill. It was the Parker's Heritage release from more than 10 years ago. I think it was the 2014, 2015 release, something like that. Check out the older episodes of the podcast. And I was saying like how American single malt started out being really crafty and like strange and different. And I think over time, it's kind of like settled into a more traditional flavor profile, but it's still its own thing. And that's what I think makes this collection unique, is like maybe someone that is a Scotch or a traditional single malt drinker doesn't want those kind of crafty, kind of super oak forward notes that we get on some experimental American single malt. They want, something they're familiar with, but made here in the US. So I think it's a really fun idea. I think I would love to try this, as a fan of bourbon and Scotch whiskey and slowly becoming a fan of American single malt. I think this might help bridge the gap even for me a little bit more because, my experience with American single malt has been pretty varied. There are some that I absolutely freaking love. Like there are some that are, especially ones that are heavily wine cask influenced. Huge fan of those, which makes sense because I feel the same way about single malt scotches that are heavily wine cask influenced. But some American single malts to me just still have a little bit too much of that grain, crafty kind of note that I associate with the category. But maybe with this, they're trying to kind of mellow it out a bit more to be more like what you would expect from a Scotch. Now, they don't necessarily say what kind of Scotches they're targeting. They don't say if it's an Islay Scotch style, a Highland, a Speyside. We don't really know. So maybe it's different depending on the different releases. Like I said, they are partnering with several distilleries, and some of these distilleries actually have multiple bottles coming from them. And based on the look of this photo they have on the press release, there are a lot of different color variations between the bottles. So hopefully we'll get some nice variety in terms of cask maturation, maybe a little bit of, finishing, double oaking, whatever they want to do. But I'm really curious to see how this does. I'm curious what Scotch whiskey drinkers will think of this, especially those that haven't really ventured into American single malt. Will this be the bridge to bring them over? We'll find out. But before we do, we have to get into this week's Byte-Sized review. All right, well, as I teased on my live stream a couple Saturdays ago with my friend Brandon, I had the opportunity to buy a bottle of the 2025 Russell's Reserve 13. I had heard a couple mixed things amongst my community about this particular bottle, so thankfully Brandon had a bottle of it that he offered me a sample of during my live stream to help decide whether I wanted to commit to a full bottle or not. Now, if you watch that live stream, you could see I was pretty dang impressed by this sample. So I went out today and picked up my bottle of Russell's Reserve 13 years old. Now, I've had a couple of these. I had the first release, which was incredible. I think I had the third release, which was like, meh. I think that was the one that a lot of people were a little bit disappointed in. But this one is the spring 2025 release. I think the only release this year. It comes in at 123.8 proof or 61.9% ABV. It is non-chill filtered, barrel proof Russell's Reserve from Wild Turkey. So this isn't really a first impression review, but it is a first fresh crack of my bottle. So let's go and get it opened. Now, I think the most interesting part of picking up this bottle is because when I bought the very first release of this back in 2021, the MSRP was $70. And I got lucky. I won the bottle in a lottery from my local liquor store and was able to buy a bottle for exactly $70. So when this one hit my inbox, it was a Total Wine Grand Reserve lottery thing. I don't know. This is the first year I've really been eligible for it. So I had to sort a bunch of different bottles and I put this near the top and ended up getting it in the selection. But when I saw that it was $199, I kind of hesitated a bit because I was like, wow, for $70, that was an incredible, mind-blowingly good whiskey. But for $200, I had to really think on it, which is why I'm really glad that Brandon gave me a sample to try. I think, for me, it hit those notes that to me make me think of a whiskey as like a limited edition taste to it. We'll see if that holds up now. And like I said, this is a fresh crack, so I'm going to let it open up a little bit before I get into the review here. Sometimes that takes a minute to come out from a new bottle. But yeah, it impressed me enough that I knew that I wanted to have a full bottle for review here. So that's what we're doing today. So I've let it sit here for about 10 minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and go in for a nose. Oh yeah, there's that classic turkey, but quite a bit different than what I've experienced, even with the 8-year wild turkey that I had just a few nights ago. There really is a ginormous oak backbone on this whiskey. It smells older than any wild turkey I've ever had, and I've had the 17-year-old bottle and bond release. And I remember saying that about the first 13-year from Russell's Reserve. I had a very similar reaction of being like, wow, this just smells like such a well-aged, refined bourbon. And I'm getting that same experience on this new release. But what's interesting is that oak, even though it is a dominant note, it isn't really overwhelming the nose on this one. It's surprisingly sweet as well. Once you really get into the glass, and again, cheers to the Glencairn Glass, once you pass that oak, I guess, outer layer on the nose, you get this really intense vanilla bean note. And it's definitely more of a natural vanilla, not that kind of sweet, vanilla frosting kind of note you sometimes get on some other whiskeys. This one is like really, really vanilla bean. There's a little bit of that like dusty turkey note that I get on some of their other releases as well. But it's very light. It's on the back end. It's not like the most prominent thing you're getting here. Really, you're getting that oak and that vanilla up front with a little bit of spice and traditional, turkey baking notes at the end. But really loving that nose on this whiskey. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. Cheers. So like I said, fresh crack, even though I let this glass sit for about 10 minutes. But really, that proof is working really, really well for this. It's not overpowering at all. It really is just adding depth and body and character to it, even on the first sip. This is the highest proof whiskey I've had all day, and yet it doesn't drink like it. It really drinks, well below its proof, but that doesn't mean that it's lacking any character at all. It actually makes up for it with that. Even though I do tend to prefer a high proof whiskey, I don't want it to necessarily burn and drink like a high proof whiskey. I want it to kind of just enhance the experience, enhance the mouthfeel, the oiliness, just the overall, even the finish, I think is enhanced by a higher proof. So this one is definitely doing the work in a different way than other high proof whiskeys have. And I know this is going to be a whiskey that I'm going to have to take my time with, because what's kind of coming across as a bit of a simple flavor profile here, I can tell that this is something that needs, just time in the glass and the bottle to really fully express itself. Because what I'm getting is really, really nice. It's a delicious pour. But to me, it feels like a little bit hard to pull out specific things. I'm getting a bit of a citrus kind of zest note, like almost like a old-fashioned cocktail kind of note on it. And of course, that oak and vanilla. I think the vanilla is not as intense as it was on the nose. I think the nose kind of caught me by surprise by how sweet that was. On the palate, though, it's more of like a oak, orange zest kind of course, typical wild turkey baking spice kind of note, a little bit of that rice spice on the back end as well. And then it rounds itself out with a medium to long finish. Honestly, the finish is what gives away that this is a wild turkey product. And it just has that typical, I don't know how to describe it. It's just more of like a, people say turkey funk, but I think of more of like a baking spice or maybe even like a allspice kind of note. Usually when I'm doing like a blind tasting, that finish is usually the giveaway that something is wild turkey. And I'm getting that on the back end more so than anywhere else in this whiskey. Up front, I would, not necessarily guess this is a wild turkey, but I can guess that this is a very well-aged bourbon. And it does indeed still have that limited edition kind of note that I look for in a $200+ bottle of whiskey. This is definitely going to be one that I have to come back to over and over again to see if that, what I call it somewhat simplistic palate really expands. It becomes more complex. I think that's kind of the only thing that's kind of faulting this right now. It's maybe that's why people said that they didn't love this release, because other releases, you're pulling out all these different flavor notes and you're finding, of course, the clove and the oak and things like that. For me, though, at least on first crack, I can see why that would be somewhat of a negative about this whiskey, and I'm going to consider it in my score for sure. But I don't think it takes away from the fact that this is a premium, highly aged, high proof, limited, allocated bourbon that I think for $200, even though it's a drastic increase in price from the original release, I think it just kind of makes sense in the line of premium bourbons in general today, in today's world. Maybe a bit higher than I think it should be. At least a better deal than the single Rickhouse series, which is going for like $300+. So it's a little bit better deal than that, but still, yeah, I definitely had to consider that before I bought this one. So in terms of rating, I think I'm going to stick with my gut here and kind of, even thinking back to that stream I had a couple Saturdays ago where I knew immediately this was a bourbon that I wanted. It still impresses me in the same kind of way. I just feel like I kind of maybe thought there would be a little bit more to the palate here. but I still think it's an exceptional bourbon. I think it's, a solid buy, especially if you're a Wild Turkey fan. So I'm going to have to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Now, there's a chance I might feel differently after it opens up some more. It's just something that I think is well-deserved a spot on my shelf. It's one that I'm not regretting that I bought at all. Do I think it's my favorite Russell's Reserve 13 ever? No, probably not. But that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it very, very much. So I think 7.5 is my point where it's like great. It's not something that I would say I'd go out and buy another bottle of, but yeah, I'm excited to see if this opens up a bit. And overall, just really, really great pour. If you take away the hype from it, you take away the allocated part of it. I did technically pay MSRP for this. I didn't overpay for it. If I did, then I'd be quite a bit more upset. But paying $200, even though that is really, really steep, that is the retail on it. So I don't feel like I got ripped off here. I think this is a very delicious product from Wild Turkey, and any fan of high proof, highly aged Wild Turkey products is gonna at least appreciate this pour. They may not think it's the best one, but they'll at least appreciate it. All right, well, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to check out bourbonbytes.com. I posted an update for both free and paid members of all my upcoming live streams for the next couple weeks, or actually even into December. I have some really fun special guests coming onto the channel on Thursday evenings from across the whiskey industry. Of course, many of you probably know already, but between last week's episode and this week's episode, I was laid off from my day job, so I've had more time to put into the podcast and the channel. So I've been reaching out to those brands, making some great connections, and I can't wait to share these upcoming series with you guys. So having you guys there to support me, whether you are just a listener or a subscriber, or you are a member of the Byte Club for as little as $2 a month, it really does mean a lot. And just to have your support and all the nice messages you guys have been sending really does mean a lot to me. And you guys are some of the first people I told, because I know that this community has been incredibly supportive. Even last time, this isn't the first time I've been laid off, but the first time in quite a while. So just seeing you guys out there saying nice things and encouraging me really does mean a lot. So I just want to say thank you. And also want to say thank you to our newest Bourbon Daddy. Yes, you heard that right. The highest tier of the Byte Club is the Bourbon Daddy, or Daddies. I guess that could be multiple ones. We'll see. We'll see if we get there. Huge shout out to Donnie and Diana, the Linux cat. Donnie and Diana have been supporters of the channel since the very beginning. And just not even just the channel, but Donnie's just been a great friend and resource, especially with this situation with losing the job and stuff. It's just really, he's been a great person to talk to. And I just want to give him and Diana a huge shout out for upping their tier on the Byte Club, for the time being. And, yeah, thank you, for being my daddy. I don't want to be like, it's funny, like it was meant as a joke, but it's also like, I kind of feel like I could lean into it, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's a little weird. I don't want to turn you guys off from the podcast. Please keep listening. All right. Well, with that does it for this week's episode. I'll see you guys next week. And until then, this has been the Bourbon Bytes Podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. Cheers, and I'll talk to you guys next episode.